Africa's unemployment rate has gone up. Data from Stats SA shows unemployment in the first quarter of this year was 32.9%, up from 32.7% in the last quarter of 2022. Now, the number of unemployed persons increased by 179,000 to 7.9 million in the quarter. The largest declines in formal sector employment were recorded in trade, mining and manufacturing. Increases in employment were recorded in the finance, government and the agricultural sectors. Now, the intense load shedding affected economic activity is largely to blame for the lackluster economic performance, leading to poor job prospects. The local economy is expected to grow at 0.2% this year, hardly significant to make a difference in denting the high unemployment rate. Unemployment is the highest amongst those without matric at 48.3%, followed by those with only matric at 41% and those with tertiary education at 7.5%. Unemployment amongst young people who are not in employment, education or training stands at 44.7%. Now, let's discuss this further. We're now joined by Marc Lubner, and he is he's the CEO of Afrika Tikkun Group. Marc, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Now, I mean, the results, indicate that 179,000 jobs were lost between the fourth quarter of 2022 as well as the first quarter of 2023. But what's your reaction, to these statistics?
Nati, horrified, frankly, and very, very deeply concerned. Our organization is involved in developing young individuals from early infancy, ultimately into the job market. And when you see that despite efforts from organizations like ours and many, many others, other worthwhile organizations, we're simply not succeeding in impacting the youth unemployment crisis. To have almost 1 out of every 2 individuals who are considered youth to be unemployed is particularly concerning. And I think many of the issues that are the reason for that are structural, but are capable of actually being impacted quite materially. My immediate reaction is, so we've got shocking statistics, and what are we going to do? Wait for the next set of statistics to see that figure go from 44.7% to 48%. We've got to do something about it. And the only way we're going to really, I think, move the needle is doing it through a sort of collaborative effort. Civil society is close to the ground. Civil society has a deep understanding of what's needed to help young individuals to advance themselves both psychosocially as well as academically. But civil society is typically fragmented and underfunded. And I do believe that if we can get to a place where the corporate sector, who in the first instance has still fortunes of cash sitting on their balance sheets, recognizes that they are actually investing in their future labor pool, we'll find that we create more productive individuals. More productive individuals, more chance of employment, more employment by people who are productive creates more employment opportunities again. So you get this wonderful uplifting spiral.
Now, you touched on the youth, and of course that is of a great concern. I mean, there were about 10.2 million young people aged between 15 to 24 years old who are not employed and also don't have education and training. I mean, that is a significant number, and we are talking here about a potentially young people that can be employed. One of the reasons that has been cited, by some experts is that improving the quality as well as access, which I think is important, of education for young people will somehow, grant them a greater chance of putting them into those essential skill services.
Well, Nadia, I think it starts much earlier than that, if I may. And forgive me, I'm not doing a plug for our organization, but rather a plug for the model. Our whole philosophy was that you've got to start intervening at a very much younger age. You've got to get young people, literally preschoolers. It starts with early childhood development. Teach discipline, teach structure, teach respect, as well as teach numeracy, literacy. We've got a huge problem, if you see that there's a stat that came out for read for meaning. Over 80% of grade 4s in South Africa, based on their survey, cannot read for meaning. So you've got to start early on. And then what you've got to do in a youth program, after schools youth program, schools program, is teach kids to believe in themselves, believe that they can, and then introduce them to the job market with the appropriate competencies and skills to individuals who kind of have a sense of where they're wanting to go. So our sense is that program, it's a process. It's not going to get fixed overnight. Necessarily requires the corporate sector to realize that they need to make a deeper investment in what I want to call holistic skills training and education, child and youth development, cradle to career development. And then government needs to align in such a way that they provide, for argument's sake, teachers' equipment, technical aids. Our teaching levels are, unfortunately, and this is not a slight on all teachers, but in general across the board, many of our teachers aren't necessarily equipped to be able to truly impact the educational performance of their students. They need to be trained on how to use technical aids, for argument's sake, to help them with their course curriculum. There's nothing wrong with the CAPS curriculum, except that it doesn't align itself to the job market. We need to add into the CAPS curriculum skills training around how do you, when you leave school, generate an income legitimately. Too many of the young people are, frankly speaking, finding employment in the rank and file of organized crime because they are not being adopted into the formal work or informal working environment.
And I mean, you say these stats, based on the study, and what we're actually not saying is that we are seeing an increase. So we are seeing an increase in the way in which, these children are not able to consume information that they're reading. Just going back to, the unemployment statistics and just, trying to categorize those young people, we find that unemployment is the highest amongst those without matric at 48.3%, followed by those with only matric at 41%, and those with tertiary education at 7.5%. I mean, these are worrying statistics, and you are offering some form of, solutions. But is there a coordinated effort with government, with other institutions like yourselves, to ensure that these young people get the help that they need?
We've embarked on something very similar 3 years ago. We launched what we call the Afrika Tikkun outreach movement to go into communities beyond those where we owned property and employed staff, with a move to try and integrate various community-based organizations. South Africa is awash with great community organizations, wanting all to do good, but all under-resourced in the main and invariably not coordinated. So what we're trying to do is actually to coordinate around this cradle-to-career concept, getting private sector in each geography to adopt a consortium of community-based organizations, leading ultimately to, as I say, skills that can be developed for those particular private sector operators, and then back-ending into government. Because there are moves afoot. Government has, for argument's sake, transferred the portfolio of early childhood development out of social security, i.e. just get kids off the street, into the Department of Basic Education, i.e. recognizing the importance of early intervention in the educational process. So there are moves afoot that just aren't necessarily being coordinated at a national level or even necessarily provincial level, albeit wherever I've spoken and to whom I've spoken, there's great support for it. The Minister of Social Development, the Minister of Basic Education have both confirmed personally in discussions that I've had with them, in meetings that we've had, that we need a more coordinated effort, even interdepartmental efforts.
And when you look at
Department of Health, Department of Social.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, sorry to interrupt you there, but when you also look at the industries in which, we're seeing these declines in terms of formal sector employment, we're also talking about trade, mining and manufacturing sectors. That's the role of TVET colleges. I think that, you mentioned several ministers there. The Minister of Higher Education could also come in there, to assist that. I mean, it is a shame that in this country we've got about 50 TVET colleges, which is just not enough.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. But you see, again, if I may, and forgive me, I keep going back to this cradle career model, but you're not going to be able to take an 18-year-old who simply can't find a job now deciding that he suddenly wants to be a plumber. You've got to infuse that desire at a much earlier age. It can't be taking a skill simply as a necessity to survive. How much more productive if a young individual is introduced to a trade in an early stage and is considered to be, adding a valuable contribution to the country. You don't only add contribution to the country if you're the CEO of Vodacom. You equally, I believe, every single contribution from every single productive individual working goes into making up our economy. So what are we doing to motivate young people through social media campaigns, for argument's sake, to adopt a trade and introducing them to the concept of that trade in our CAPS curriculum, by way of example? In the years when I went to school, it wasn't considered infra dig, as it were, to become an electrician. It was in fact quite a clever move because you knew that you had a skill that you could always generate an income from. So I just think we need to change the profile of a number of those trades and make them much more attractive and appealing to young people.
Right.
And then the TVET colleges necessarily, make it affordable.
Absolutely. Marc Lubner, thank you so much for your time.